Hello, good evening, Iain and panel.
What would you like to ask?
Yes, I would like to ask if any of the parties represented tonight, if their manifestos will propose that Britain should rejoin the European Union, as seems to be the majority view of the general population.
Richard Thomson for the SNP.
Yes, it will. I mean, I want Scotland to be in the European Union. I very much regret the fact that we were taken out of the European Union against the will of those who cast their votes in Scotland. I'm very clear the best outcome is for all parts of the UK to be back into the European Union. Steve and I have sparred over the situation of Northern Ireland, and I think many of the problems that we've sparred over would not have arisen at all had we stayed at least within the single market and customs union. But I think we have to be realistic. All the other three parties, Labour, Lib Dems, Conservatives, are either have fully embraced it or are at least accepting of the situation that we're in. And I think that voters like yourself have an opportunity in Scotland to vote for something better, to put our future back in their own hands, and to go back into the European Union as an independent Scotland. But I think that certainly, whether you're for independence in Scotland or not, the democratic argument is about giving people the right to have their say on that in light of all the circumstances that have changed, particularly since Brexit. But unambiguously, whether Scotland's in the Union or, as I hope, is out of the UK Union before too long, I am unambiguously clear that we should be back in the European Union, and the SNP will make that case with gusto.
And why aren't the Liberal Democrats making that case, Alistair Carmichael?
We do make the case. I mean, I think we're realistic in saying that, yes, we want to get there eventually. We'll see what's in the manifesto come the publication of it. You heard Davy recently saying that we would want to go back into the single market as the first step of undoing some of the economic damage that has been done by Brexit. So that would be a sensible first step. And, you know, it's not going to be a quick or an easy process. Your first question was about how do we restore faith in politics? Well, you know, I think repairing some of the damage that was done by messages that were written inside of a bus, or in my constituency, fishermen promised a sea of opportunity and the rest of it, which the reality has turned out to be very, very different, would be a good step. And, you know, that would be...
But as the third party, at least in England, surely it's a good idea to really have a differentiating policy. Now, Labour, I mean, we'll hear from Anneliese in a second, but it's not going to be in Labour's
I don't think either Anneliese or
it's not going to be in the Conservative
will talk about going back into the single market in the next Parliament.
So you've always been seen as the most pro-European
party. Shaking her head. That maybe won't come across on radio, but she's confirming that this is something you will not do.
But the camera's on you at the moment.
Indeed.
But as I say, the Lib Dems have always been the most pro-European party, so why not take advantage of that?
Well, you know, look, because we are being realistic here. We've been through the long protracted process of Brexit. We have really got, you know, some major challenges that the country has to tackle, and we know because of the way that politics unfolded when we were coming out, that sort of constitutional wrangling is a massive distraction from doing these things. So step by step, the realistic thing to offer for those people who do see the future for the United Kingdom at the heart of Europe, as Liberal Democrats do and always have done, is to go back into the single market, and that's what we have already committed to.
Anneliese Dodds, I suspect that a large proportion of your party membership would like to go back into the EU, but Keir Starmer can't promise any such thing, can he? Because he wouldn't win back some of the red wall seats that he needs to.
Well, the reality is, of course, that people have voted to leave the EU. That decision has been taken. Now, I'm someone who was on the different side of the argument during the referendum. I was campaigning for the UK to stay within the EU, but ultimately, you know, it's very clear in that referendum that wasn't what people wanted. And of course, Labour ran at the last general election saying that we would have another referendum, and we lost that election. That decision has been taken by the British people. However, the deal that we've ended up with under the Conservatives is not a good deal for our country. You know, you have many countries, for example, that are outside the EU that have a veterinary agreement with the EU. In fact, Northern Ireland has a veterinary agreement effectively with the EU, but the rest of the UK doesn't. We need to sort that out. We need to have a security pact between the UK and the EU. We need to sort out the issues, for example, for our touring musicians. The number of musicians from Britain has gone through the floor who are able to tour in the EU.
That has been sorted out for many countries, hasn't it?
Well, the problem is, though, there's many, actually, who still don't have that kind of an agreement with the UK, and that just means that the kind of EU tour that British musicians used to do is simply not viable anymore. So you're seeing much lower numbers of them. But these kinds of issues we can sort out. We believe that we can put our country first, that we can actually have those negotiations and deal with them. But that's not about re-entering the EU. It's not about entering the single market, for example. That decision's been taken by the British people.
Tony Blair always said that he rather regrets the fact that he wasn't more radical in his first term. He had this massive majority and frankly could have got away with anything if he'd wanted to. And he now thinks he made a mistake by that. Now, everyone's speculating about the size of a Labour majority, but let's say it was a massive majority. Surely that almost would give Keir Starmer the mandate to go much further than you're intimating that he would. I mean, just renegotiating things here and there on veterinary agreements, whatever. It's pretty small beer compared to what some people say the damage is that Brexit's done.
Well, of course, not a single vote has yet been cast in the general election, so we need to see what the outcome of it will be. But actually, I think the missions that Keir Starmer set out, they're long-term, but they're very radical in terms of the change that they would bring. Decarbonising our energy supply by 2030 with GB Energy, publicly owned green energy company, that would be a huge change. Building 1.5 million new homes, a huge change for people. Getting our NHS not just back on its feet, but fit for the future, again, a huge change, particularly for those people on an NHS waiting list at the moment. So these would be very significant changes, but ones where we're being very upfront with the public about the fact that they will need first steps and they are long-term, as I said before.
OK, Steve.
Well, the privilege of convening and organising the Conservative Eurosceptic MPs since 2015 has been a mixed blessing. But one of the positive blessings is, well, indeed, yeah. But because somebody will shout at the radio, but I'm regarded as a straight talker, and I've ended up with very positive relations with EU embassies. I won't name the countries, but significant countries. And I can tell people a couple of things. One, they wouldn't want us back. It's 8 years on. We've only just got out with the Windsor framework, and they would not want us back. They're not in that space. They've got enough problems. I mean, I had a private conversation with one figure. I mean, it's on a record somewhere, but it wouldn't be appropriate to put it out there now. But we were talking about people's fears that Labour would salami slice the country's way back in, and he just instantly and naturally, heartily laughed. The EU doesn't want that to happen. It's just too much trouble having got us out. However, what I'm absolutely sure they do want, because I've discussed it with individual member state ambassadors and the EU ambassador himself, and I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying, they want to deepen the relationship. Now, what does that mean? Because Eurosceptics will immediately feel on edge. It means cooperation on the basis of being an independent nation state. Now, a veterinary agreement, I'd be all in favour of a veterinary agreement of the kind New Zealand has, because New Zealand hasn't subordinated itself to EU law. But for all the I'm willing to compromise on the Windsor framework. It has to be said, we've achieved what we have on in the Windsor framework because we've left in place some EU law, which means in those areas, in particular in relation to food, from farm to fork, EU law reigns supreme, which causes immense tensions. And by the way, they've only been willing to do what they've done in Northern Ireland, which is a deal unlike anything else they've done. It's not single market membership. It's a much smaller proportion of EU law. They've only done that because we all appreciate the really globally unique circumstances of Northern Ireland. Yeah. The Troubles, it's a divided society. It's got the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and crucially, it's got an infrastructure-free border with a foreign country. And that what's been achieved in Northern Ireland is unprecedented. And I think if things had gone throughout the Brexit process the way I wanted, I could certainly stand this statement up. I might have been able to achieve more for Northern Ireland and a better set of arrangements for Northern Ireland, one more acceptable to unionists and Eurosceptics than has been achieved. I could certainly show you the papers that I've either wrote over the years or procured the writing of, but that just wasn't possible. So what I would say is, to everybody listening, I can assure you the EU doesn't want us back, But do they want defence cooperation as sovereign equals? Do they want touring musicians? Would they be willing to let young people travel around Europe? Yes, and I would say yes to all of those things. But the idea that they would put up with us applying for membership, or I really don't think they'd want us in the single market and customs union, because they know, as I know, that it would return British politics to a state of constitutional chaos. And at a time like this, they don't need the United Kingdom as an unreliable partner, which is what we'd revert to. It would be a disaster.
Sounds like that second referendum might have been quite a good idea after all, Steve.
No, well, so, look, I wouldn't have put citizens' rights on the tables out of the block. I wouldn't. I like people, and I welcome the European citizens in my constituency. And I would never have put their rights on the table. I would have seized the moral high ground and said, you should stay, you're welcome to stay, we value you in this country. However I don't know yet how legally we'll sort it out, but let me tell you this, you're welcome, please stay, glad you're here. But by the way, as of the vote, you won't be able to stay.
What a shame Theresa May couldn't bring herself to utter those words at the time.
Forgive me, this is a thing that's really I'm passionate about. I can definitely stand up that after the 2016 election, I knew what to do and I knew how to do it, and it would have been a better solution for Northern Ireland than we've got today. But unfortunately, I wasn't in charge.
Right,
Sorry.
we have to move on.